Yo, what's good? Should be all good to hear me. Everything should be clear. Yes, all these videos will be up on Twitch. My Discord's there, and I'm there. So you can hit me with any questions or anything, like if you're watching this after or whatever. Alright, so talking about sampling today. You guys saw my little outline here. There's a lot of shit, man. There's a lot of stuff in here. Alright, so my original plan was to kind of do 2 different levels of classes a week. Where it's like advanced and and beginner at the same time. But that doesn't really make that much sense. So we're just going to go whole course. So pretty much, like, if you're following along with all this shit, you're enrolled in Icon right now for free. It's great. Alright, so sampling. We're talking about sampling today. So sampling is like a huge thing because it's like all encompassing. And like no part of sampling is pretty much immune to whatever your DAW has and your DAW interface to sampling itself. So like a lot of people don't understand what, say, bit depth sample rate is. 44.1, 48K, 88.2, 96, double that, you know, whatever that means. You know, that's kind of a confusing thing for a lot of people. So I kind of want to talk about that, you know, because that's kind of a huge thing, and that's where we're going to start with all of it, because that's over everything that I'm going to talk about, and that's all in that outline here. Like, this is the thing that's like the most audio engineering specific. Thank you for the follow. Yeah, so this is like the thing you need to like really understand if you're gonna actually, say, you know, be able to argue with somebody why you're making a decision about certain quality of files you're sending them, or when somebody asks for a certain quality of files, you'll be able to give it to them without being confused. Like, I've worked on games where people have asked for 22, not 44. Because, you know, to the point of like understanding how sample rate works, 44 means twice the amount of samples per second. So if it's 22, then it's the correct amount, but it's not really that accurate. It was just one take. So times that by 4, and you have 196, and that's, well, actually 192, 96K. So yeah, 192, that has like a purpose because of the fact that it's a larger file size, but it's also taking more samples per second. So that's pretty much the function of your clock inside of your interface. And like back to what we were talking about, you know, in the last class with synthesis and MIDI, that actually kind of means the same thing here too, where sampling in the digital world is called A to D conversion. So like A to D conversion really, you know, changes how you hear your own music out of your speakers and how the audio is coming in to be recorded. So if you had a bad interface, you know, all that can be affected by that. You know, like a bad clock would mean that you would have dropouts. And what that sounds like is clicks and pops every now and then. Sometimes something will happen on your computer, like your computer will get, you know, overloaded for a second, and your interface will cut out, freak out, sometimes cut out. Mine started doing that, and I've seen, you know, tons of people's interfaces do that. So, like, that's how I knew it was ready to die. But now I have Motu. That thing works well. It goes all the way up to 182. So that's really good to do if you're going to be, you know, doing anything that's sound design oriented above just the making music realm. You know, and if you're going to go and make a sample pack for your alias or whatever, you know, that's also going to be affected by the quality in which you record the sounds. So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into play when that happens. So there's a couple notes in here about a big part of what I'm talking about, and that's called the Nyquist-Shannon theorem, or just the Nyquist theorem. That's how it's like typically called. But yeah, so it states that in order to accurately capture audio digitally for humans, because this is based on the human ear's hearing range. 22 is not a random number. That's the number of cilia we have in our ears. And each one of those picks up an individual frequency. So you can even say that our ears have a filter bank-like transducer. So it has one little transducer for each frequency. And every time you overblow it, one of those dies. Think about that. But yeah, so that is also crucial to know, because that also changes how we mix audio. So like, this is something that's like, if you're going to go to college, this is something you'll learn about audio for sure, 100%. And this will be something that when you're talking professionally with somebody who is an engineer doing whatever, they're going to be, you know, not talking Nyquist theorem shit. They're going to be saying Fletcher-Munson curve, Fourier transform that. You know, so Fletcher-Munson curve is another like rating curve that is pretty much for like just the human ear's kind of like noise profile. So what we are the most sensitive to and what we perceive quieter, you know. So the human ear is sensitive to 3.2 kilohertz because that is the range that a baby cries in. And females' ears are more susceptible to that. And so they're naturally more sensitive. Doesn't mean they're tuned for babies. It means they're just more sensitive. You know, so it also means that if you're a female, your hearing's probably more optimized for audio engineering. That's just some science. So yeah, definitely check this out, because this is pretty deep if you're curious. But what I just said about it being the human ear's, you know, range, 44.1, that's all you really need to know. So at least twice the range of the human hearing and adhering to Fourier transform standards. So Fourier transform is pretty much an algorithm that decomposes the frequency content of incoming signal and converts that to data. So that's what I said right here, into raw data, which it can be distributed and captured. So that's important because that's how your DAW is capturing audio. So your DAW sees things linearly and I guess laterally. So it's seeing everything all at once, but in time. So there needs to be one line of code for each frequency. And the Fourier transform decomposes that. So if you're inside of like some kind of spectrum analyzer or anything like that, even just using your DAW and hearing sound, like all that's in play. And then the final like big point here, because when I get into like mixing and mastering, like those classes will be way more in depth on audio engineering. This is sound design. So this is sound design and sampling. So if you don't know anything about audio engineering yet, you need to know this. This is a key point to know, because this changes how you record things and how you take samples. Alright, so I'm going to make a bit point why in like a second. But bit depth, I'm sure people kind of understand what that means. You know, bit depth pretty much means resolution. In other terms, noise floor. Do people with golden ears or better than average hearing have more than 22? No. What they are is they have 22,000. So most people don't have that many. Some people keep more. Some people's are more strong. I would guess. But nobody has more. If they had more, then they would be a medical marvel. That's how weird that is. So to have more, you would be a dog. So that's what that means. That's why it's measured for humans and not for dogs. If it was for dogs, then it'd be like, oh, it's the standard 500,000 kilohertz. Yeah, but we're not dogs, so we're limited. So, to bit depth, talking about noise floor, 16-bit is the standard resolution for most mediums. So that determines how quiet you can record a signal. So when we talk about saturation and like bit crushing, sample destruction, that's all going to be a thing. Like all this stuff. You're going to know what these numbers are and know how to manipulate them to destroy something. It's kind of like, making an atom bomb. You know how to split the atom first. So in like old times, back in the day, they had 8-bit. And pretty much what that means, and I'm talking about resolution. So resolution means clarity. If you're thinking about lower resolution film, you see pixels. So pixelated things, hard edges and curves. And so that also translates over to audio. So in 8-bit world, you can only really hear square waves or triangle waves because those have jagged edges. So you can't really even hear a triangle wave. Yeah, that would be like, the Commodore 64, like 4th gen. It's like, we got triangle waves now. Happy Saturday. So, yeah, that's that. So, pretty much like, and I did note this, if you're going to do homework, because I'm going to quiz on this. This is going to be part of the next quiz. Noise floor ranges vary between bit depths. So that means that 8-bit would have half of 96, so 48. So that means below 0, you can only go neg 48 dB. Anything below neg 48 dB gets normalized. Doesn't get clipped off, gets normalized. So now it's higher. But if it is like the original signal is below that, so neg 44, and you want to get like a really quiet signal, you wouldn't really get anything at all. You would just hear kind of static. So you had to record shit higher, or they just didn't even do it. And that was kind of it. They just really didn't even, consider digital audio medium until 16-bit was a thing. Yeah, because CDs were like that, were just garbage. DVDs were garbage. It was all garbage until it was not garbage. So with 16-bit, you can go down neg 96 dB, and 24-bit, you can go down neg 144. So there's a third one, 32-bit, but that is exponentially higher and also a little bit irrelevant for right now. So I'm not going to be talking about 32-bit until we get to like higher audio engineering shit, because I think that's just kind of a waste of time right now. But pretty much what it means, 32-bit combined with the 32-bit floating point engine means that you can record plus 0 dB and not clip. In theory. I've gotten some capturing, but you need to have like an Apollo level clock, and that's the kind of thing that like really changes the clock as well, is sampling rate and bit depth range. So the UAD clock can go up to 32-bit. So I've recorded stuff through the UAD that has gone above 0, and I've seen it clip on Ableton, and I pulled down the level and I got the peak back. But once it gets downsampled, then you don't have that, so you need to go and step it down before you go and convert it or downsample it, because that's what that would mean now. Because now that you know that's what sampling means, when you say downsample, or upsample, that's what that means. We're talking about sample rate. So now we're talking about oversample, or oversampling pretty much in every plugin I've seen kind of calls it that. That means it's taking a snapshot of things earlier so it can accurately represent what's happening right now. So it creates latency by doing that. And that's why Ozone has plus 1,000 plus samples of latency. And that's why they call it 1,000 plus samples, because that's what they're talking about. They're talking about all these samples that are being taken by your interface. That's how the computer reads audio. So when you're in sampler or simpler, not really simpler actually, just sampler, it refers to time in samples because it is using max, and max is a very bare bones kind of thing. So that's not the only thing that refers to samples though. Like if you're going to do any kind of like higher level audio engineering shit, a lot of things have to do with samples, especially when you're doing stuff with film. Because frame sync and SMPTE time lock is a pain in the ass. And if you don't know what you're doing with samples and frame lock, then you're lost. I don't know how to help you, man. But it's all good because you're not there. And we're not working on a movie right now, so it's chill. Alright, so here's the first point. So I think you guys should really watch this documentary on Netflix called Sample This. If you haven't, definitely check it out. It's tight. It's pretty much just about hip hop. But if you want to kind of see, where sampling kind of has evolved. So we're going to talk about samplers and warping. And this is why I brought up this shit. Because I would have probably been like, oh, it's a little bit more than we need to talk about. But it's not. Because I'm going to talk about warping, and that's a huge part of sound design. And granular, spectral resynthesis, all this shit. If you don't know this, this will make little to no sense at all. And you'll just be twisting knobs and making coolly, flippy, down pitchy things forever. And just being like, this is what this thing does. But never make anything really, intentional with it. Okay, so history. First sampler, pretty much multi-sampler, was the Mellotron, pretty much, where it had individual tape deck for every single key. So that was just super heavy-handed. Very little, a select group of people could afford to even use it or even own it. And so that's like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, all these dudes that were using like Led Zeppelin used it in Stairway to Heaven. On the intro with the flute sound. That's all Mellotron. And that's back in that day, it's the equivalent to $250,000 just for one hardware Mellotron. Because they had 10 patches, which means they had, probably about 50 keys. So that means 50 tape decks times 10. So 500 tape decks that need to be super small and need to loop. So it's just a huge undertaking back then. So, but that actually dictates how all mono samplers work. If you understand what a mono sampler is, what I'm talking about is a simpler. One sample, and that's it. You get one sample, you can play it in all the keys, but pitch and time are connected. And that's going to be another big point, And I'm going to keep talking about that. Pitch and time being connected. Because when pitch and time are connected, everything's running at the right per second rate. So if pitch and time weren't connected, then I would need to stretch out the audio and replace those gaps I've created with new audio. So that's where warping and granular comes in. So all that is inside of samplers now, and we don't have to worry about that shit. But that kind of repitching sound, that kind of comes from the original samplers. And just controlling audio in general. So in order to play back audio, say on a vinyl player, you have to play it at a certain speed. Different size vinyl, different speed. So that all coincides. Alright, so now sampling hip hop. Now almond break, and that's why I like sent all those breaks to you guys, all that jungle shit. You can hear the wheel up sound, all the good ones. You know, the ones that like everybody on Renraku has just, you know, beat into submission. Me included. And now you too. You can be the next person to abuse it. But yeah, don't abuse it. But yeah, the almond breaks in there are really great, and there's like a ton of variations. So pretty much like this is one of the big things about Sample This is they really paint like the meaning behind like why the break went off. You know, there's a theory behind that. It's like a happening, you know? It's not like this is just a formula. I mean it is, but it wasn't just like something somebody calculated. Something somebody noticed and then just was like, what if I just do this only? So they noticed that anytime, you know, the break would come on in certain like funk tracks, people would just lose their shit. And so they just would do their best to go and loop that as many times as possible. And Grandmaster Flash is one of the first persons who like were people that like developed a actual method for creating scratch loops and utilizing and finding and sampling. You know, so that's like a big thing that he was the first producer, like us, pretty much. If we're to be making beats and doing all that, impossible back then. Literally impossible. And this guy was looping the thing that we still loop now. Alright, so you got to be able to like understand both sides of that, where it's like, here's the digital synthesis realm, it's still sampling. Here's the engineer realm, it's still sampling. And here's the applied music realm. Alright, so yeah, so they've like, that's kind of my point with all this shit. I don't really just read that shit out loud. But yeah, so you got like Contact now and like Ableton that comes with all this shit that's just amazing. Like Sampler is amazing. It's one of the best like samplers that comes with a DAW that I've ever used. I really like Logic's. I've used Fruit Loops. They're all good, but Ableton has a FM engine in it, and that's really cool. Being able to put FM into samples is something like that's really random and can give you really, really dope sounds. Like the sound on like the track I just released, my most recent one, I Know You See It, was all sampler with FM. And that was from a resample I took from BCB Rack. So it's like I make something with the synth, put it in a sampler, and then fuck it up again. And that's something I learned from watching Culprit videos. And, you know, listening to Cohen Sound. And taking nuggets from little random fucking blog posts that they would do back in like 2011, 2012. And just like hyper analyzing it. You know? So it's like, if you want to go and use that with like neuro, hip hop, or left field shit, I guess. And, you know, just any other type of thing. Like trying to make fucking dubstep trap. Make some Ricky San shit. You know, go and do that. You know, trying to make some What So Not Jaguar bass kind of ish. Go do that. Sampler is like literally one of the go-tos for like a lot of people. And I bet you like nobody would argue with me on that. But that's not even just Ableton Sampler. It's just the nature of using samples and sounds that work and that you like. It's like, well, you know, I don't want to fuck with the synth anymore. I just want to play it back and change the note a couple times. So that's kind of the function of that. But then you can go and resample it multiple times and get it as crazy as possible, and then go and put it in a synth and automate shit after that. So there's a lot of things you can do. Um, Go check out one of like Seppa or Slugwife Cursa stream. You'll probably see a bunch of that shit, or frequent. All right, so I want to talk about warping for a bit, because that kind of ties into what I was just talking about here, just to switch gears. Because going into like samplers and multi-sampling, that's a really, really deep topic, like super deep, like a whole class, like pretty much 301 synthesis or sampling, I guess, is like, let's build a contact player, because that's how deep contact can get. I'm not even gonna talk about that right now, because I'll just get sidetracked. But yeah, it's deep. So something that'll like definitely help all that other shit make a little bit more sense is understanding like warp algorithms, really what that means. So back to bit depth and sample rate. So I kind of mentioned, like, if I was going to stretch out a sample and I have a set amount of samples, meaning 44,000 per second, and then I could just go and stretch out one sample. Because there's a lot of samples, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be space in between those samples. It just means there's a lot of resolution, so there's less space, but there's still space. Micro amounts. So those micro amounts, though, have to be filled in by something, or else it just drops out, because this is the only way pitch and time can be unlinked. And so I actually didn't write this down in here, but this is actually a good note, but I didn't think it would be really that pertinent, because people don't use Rex anymore. They just really don't. And they don't use Reason anymore, unfortunately. Reason was my first like big synthesis DAW, and that was the first thing I like used to learn synthesis. But now it's just like not that much of a thing anymore. But I still love it. I still think Reason is amazing. I think Noah the Boy, I know for a fact Dirk used it like in everything. And he was just like kind of an advocate for it. Ended up using, Ableton after that and shit. But so did Cone Sound, and so did a ton of other people like Kill the Noise, and so it's just a really easy DAW to learn. Really cool to experiment in, but also taught you how to use CV and pitch and gate at the same time. So it actually taught you how to do synthesis. It's not like being in Ableton and just loading up a massive patch or a serum patch. You're not learning shit. You're learning how to turn a macro, or switch a couple knobs in a preset. You didn't build that original thing. Doesn't mean you're a piece of shit. All right, don't freak out. It's all right. But it means that you don't really know what you're doing. And if that hurts you, it should. Okay, so now warping, granular, means the ability to unlink pitch and time, because now samples are turned to grains, and these grains are generated. So there's a generator built into each clip of audio inside of Pro Tools, inside of Ableton, inside of Logic. Ableton is my favorite by far out of all of them, because Ableton has warping per clip, and other DAWs do not. I believe Fruity Loops is a little bit of the same way. But I haven't used Fruity Loops in a bit. Or I'm sorry, FL Studio. Grown up Fruity Loops. FL20. They're a big boy now. Watch out. I'm just kidding. Alright, so if you're using like texture, tones, if we're gonna go into like sampling a little bit, just open up my bad. Just like ripping the chat right now. Alright, so what I was saying about creating space in between each sample and Rex before I started talking shit about Fruity Loops. Each one of these little markers creates a sample point. And so what Rex did prior to most, if not all DAWs, was it unlinked this transient point, because that's easily markable. It's just a loud point. If you're telling your computer, don't look for things that are normal, like normal range here. Look for something that's abnormal for a little amount of time, and then mark it. Like even this one, that was abnormal, but it was tiny. So that's pretty much what it was doing. It was taking each sample and then allowing it to play it back like a drum rack, and play it back with MIDI. So each part of this thing here was MIDI. So when I go and do this, take this drum loop, and I think I actually need to have a drum rack on here. Actually, no. I can just right click it. So when I do any of this shit, like convert to drums, or even slice to new MIDI track. So slice to new MIDI track, this is a Rex player right here. So this is the original form of warping, where you go and slice it up, and each little transient was its own MIDI note, and now it triggered back, and it was just playing a mono sampler now that was a sample. But yeah, it was pretty cool. It was really good, actually. Yeah, it still is. But yeah, pretty much, and I made a point in this that when you go and say do anything with beats, rhythm, that is going to be looking for transients. And so what it does is every time a transient comes in, this now controls a volume curve. And that volume curve is just decaying because this is off mode. It's not on loop mode. This is loop mode. Loop forward mode and loop forward backward mode. And so this allows you just to loop this original sample, and there's no generation happening. When you go into texture or tones, and I'm just using Ableton as an example because it has all the examples here. And when we go into Contact has all these in every single sample player. So looking at Simpler and stuff like that, that's cool that it has all this stuff in here, but Contact has 4 times that. And then Iris has 5 times that with its Iris RX engine built into it. Yo, Aaron, it is. And they can go suck it. Okay, so but it's also something I made, so I don't feel bad at all. Okay, so talking about tones, texture, now just kind of talking about RX for a second. RX is a spectral resynthesizer. So what that does is not only does it scan the entire waveform, meaning the Fourier transform of an incoming signal, it also goes and resynthesizes the fidelity of that waveform and keeps it big and strong for 2 octaves. But it's a lot of resolution, takes a lot of processing. Alright, so beats, just individual samples, and you're going to see this, in all the samplers and stuff, including, drum samplers and all that. Tones, this is a monophonic granular mode. So I say granular mode because granular is also kind of referred to as sample and hold, where you're taking one grain and you're stretching it and repeating it. So when you go into tones, complex or complex pro, what it's doing is it's analyzing. Oops. Scared me. I scared myself. I hit this little guy. So it's analyzing the waveform. It's saying this is what the original waveform looks like. Slow it down. I'll do my best to recreate that shape. It's not going to just take, say in granular mode, texture or tones. It's not going to take this little impulse, which is also called a warp marker. It's not going to take that warp marker as, you know, the example of, oh, there's space now in between these samples here. Let's just repeat that little tiny grain. So that's what that's referring to, the grain. This is the grain right here. How big is that grain? And this is telling the grain how big to be. It's saying grain be little and fill in the gap. Grain be big, fill in large gap. And grain will be like, sure. Alright, I'll do that. Complex and Complex Pro are like a maybe sometimes. Complex Pro is pretty good. Ableton 9, if you're still on Ableton 9, Complex is not good. And you should be using beats only if you're using any types of drums at all. Because there's a huge bug in Ableton 9 and Ableton 8 where we clip off transients from individual drum samples. So if you're using, say, one sample of a kick and you're like, this is a dope kick, and you throw it in on an audio track and you're like, yo, this is a dope hi-hat because I'm the god. And then you throw it on its own hi-hat track. Then some of those hi-hat transients are going to be clipped off. Just like your wings, hi-hat god. Your wings are clipped, bro. Alright, so yeah, so I just want to like actually just define all of these algorithms here, because you're going to see these in pretty much every DAW, every single synth that has some type of sampling in granular mode. Say like, well, Contact already, but Omnisphere, Absinthe a little bit. If there was like an Absinthe 6, maybe. But yeah, definitely Iris is a big one. That's probably one of my favorite like mono samplers, because you can do multi-sampling in it, but it's very limited. It's only 4 samples you can put in it, just because it's so beefy, you know. It just got too much, you know, it's just got. Alright, so beats, individual samples. So I'm telling you this over and over so you just remember it. Or you can just, you know, tune out, whatever. Tones is monophonic, granular. So I was saying 44,000 samples per second. When you stretch it out, you create spaces. And those spaces are filled with grains. Like grains of sand in an hourglass. We gotta fill the time that we have with something. And that's grains. Alright, so texture is polyphonic. So this is actually going to take a snapshot of the Fourier transform, meaning a snapshot of all the frequencies as they happen at one point in time. So laterally. So grain size here is taking a snapshot of this grain again, is allowing me to change the size of that grain, but now it's going to go and whoops, it's going to go and trigger. But now it's going to go and fill in a little bit more of the high end and try to recreate a little bit more of the waveform. Kind of like halfway in between tones and complex. But then you also have this little flux, you know, modulator here. And this randomizes the grain size. So this is going to be really important for you to know if you're going to understand what granular synthesis is all about in a synth. Because grain clouds are huge. And if you use grain delay, you know, there's a lot of knobs in there. A lot of knobs in this grain delay. It does a lot of stuff. Yeah, what does that really mean though? It means something. Find out. Alright, so repitch, that's tape mode. You know, it's pitch and time are linked. So if you're going to go make a set in Ableton, for like a DJ thing, which I think this was for that at some point. For like some kind of live thing. Want to use that. Complex, I was saying, recreates the waveform. It doesn't just fill it in with snapshots or grains. It is a resynthesizing algorithm. So granular synthesis is resynthesis, granular synthesis, spectral synthesis, and individual sampling. Because this is sampling. This is sampling. It's taking a snapshot and sampling it here. There's really no creation happening. It's looping something. And these are resynthesizing. Complex Pro gives you control of the frequency range. So formats. Format is kind of the fidelity and focus of the actual pitch range of the original sample. So this can be cool to like really mess with, but it does require a lot of processing. So if you do something Complex Pro at a high sample rate, you might blow up your computer. Might be worth it. You should record that too. You should record yourself blowing up your computer and then sample that. And then put it back in and do it again. Blow up your computer again, trying to blow up your computer with the sound of your computer blowing up. You should do all that. So that's like a free sample library right there. I just gave that to you. Alright, so that's all the algorithms, and like that's gonna be like kind of it, for that. And if you have any more questions about how that works, let me know. Yeah, exactly. So, digital samplers. I've already talked about this a bunch already. So I want to kind of really talk about drum samplers though. So SP1200 and SP404, those are really, really common ones. MPC 2000, and there's a bunch of other ones. MPD. I'm not really a big fan of the Akai stuff, to be honest. I like the MPC. I think it's good. I think it's really overpriced and overhyped for what it does. I think the SP404 and SP1200 sound a lot better. Personally, I like the SP404 a lot more. Just because it's simple. And, but the SP1200, I was talking to my buddy Zach today, and he was telling me, I think like Dr. Dre and a bunch of other people use it as well. And that's kind of like, it's kind of the thing. Like, if you're going to make hip-hop, you really got to know your way around a drum rack, drum sampler. You can't just be Mr. Audio Boy forever, because Mr. Rapper Man's going to come in, he's going to want you to lay down a beat in like 20 minutes, or else he's done, because his boy's got shit to do. So it's like, you got to be able to lay down a beat really quick. That's something that, like, knowing your way around a drum rack can really help you do, because literally all a drum rack is, and I kind of make a point of this, is it's just a rack of mono samplers, similar to the way a Mellotron worked. So Mellotron worked with an individual tape deck, and this works with individual mono samplers. Some of them don't have repitching algorithms like Ableton's, but if you use battery or any other, like, if a piece of software is going to specialize in drum sampling, it's going to repitch it somehow. Probably the most anti-drum synthesis drum synth I use every now and then is Kick 2, because Kick 2 is so counterintuitive to how you actually got to think about actually synthesizing a drum that you can first of all, you can only make kicks in it. And second of all, you're learning zero about how to synthesize a kick. So if you go and try to synthesize a kick in anything else, after being like, I just made the dopest trance kicks in Kick 2, you're gonna be like really fucking demoralized. So yeah. So drum samplers, they will have this little thing, or repitching algorithms. It's called aliasing. And so there's certain algorithms that are anti-aliasing, or samplers. And simpler and sampler both have anti-aliasing settings, so you have a little bit better quality. And so that's what high quality means here. High quality means anti-aliasing, so it's allowing you to have less just random inner sample peak errors and shit like that. Shit that you would see inside of a ozone plugin that you'd be like, what does that button do? I'll turn it on and make my shit better. Like that's that button. Like dither. What's that? I need it. Power 3 because that's the highest number. Always the highest number. How many OTTs? All of them. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. There's high quality settings on all that shit. Also, become more versed in a drum rack. I'm not requiring you to do that as your homework because not everybody wants to use a drum rack, and that's fine. If you want to use audio, that's chill. Whoops. I just delete all that. So you can use audio, but you got to know how all this shit works. You can also not know how any of this shit works and just be like, I like texture, bro, because it sounds fucking crazy, dude. And then you can like get by, and you can get booked, and it's no problem. You know, I ain't getting on you for that. I'm trying to teach work here. So, alright, so it's good to keep all this stuff in mind before I get into this last stuff here, because I actually want to make a little bit of shit for a little bit here, and then kind of like apply some stuff. There's like just a ton of theory, just like a fuck ton of theory. And I'm sure most of you weren't aware of half of this stuff, or were, you know, but just haven't had this spelled out, because this is just the way I understand things. So, alright, so back in here, multi-samplers, trigger modules, and MIDI filter modules. So MIDI filter modules are a little bit different. They're not as sampler-ish as the other ones, but they're kind of sampler-ish. You can trigger a sampler. Okay, so the depth of a multi-sampler means that you have a bunch of samples. You don't just have one. So whenever you hear mono, that means one. Multi, more. Poly, more. So all that, you know, is logical terminology. Does not change when you look at things in a different light. Same thing with like sampling. Hence why I'm kind of painting this big picture here, because this is like a big thing that, because of what I taught in synthesis about the harmonic series and all that, when I talk about like how everything else works, like mixing and everything like that, it should all be just rehashed, the same thing I've said over and over again, but now you understand it to the point of understanding it. You know, it's not just a fresh piece of knowledge that you're trying to remember anymore. It's now something you can apply because it's in your long-term memory. You know, and that's really the point of learning shit, is so you can get into your long-term memory. You know, like, don't want, you know, fresh knowledge about Ableton, but then having to do a session with Jay-Z later, you know? It's like, oh, I never use Ableton. Fuck. Jay-Z wants me to use Ableton. Shit. I don't know what situation that's some kind of like sitcom in my head or something. But, you know, when you're under the gun, you're going to want to be able to do what you can do. You don't want to be like fumbling around being like, oh, well, dude, I fucking never have touched the thing before. It's like, oh, I thought you were just joking when you said, I'm really dumb for a living and I think it's cool. Alright, so trigger modules. So this, I'm making a point here about why these are important. If you're going to be an engineer at all, or you actually play like real music, and I say that as a producer, you know, I'm not like a rock engineer or something. I'm not David Pensato on fucking YouTube being like, oh, all these kids listen to square waves all day. It's like, no. But if you're going to do anything with live music at all, you need to understand how a trigger module works. And a trigger module is a multi-sampler. Yeah, I just assumed you're Dobra. Um, yeah, so a trigger module is a multi-sampler. So if anybody is a drummer and has ever been like, oh, light like metal, or whatever, you know, you have to understand how a trigger module works, because that's how it works nowadays. People want you to sound good, you know, so it needs to be like the most perfect hit every single time. And like for me personally, this right here is actually why I do all of this, because I was a metal musician and jazz musician before all this. And because I had to use trigger modules and had to learn how that shit worked, I got into synths. And I was like, this shit is dope. What else they got? And then now I'm not doing that anymore, and I'm only doing this. So trigger modules are cool. Definitely have to understand them if you want to do any live shit ever at all. Because it doesn't just mean drum, it means any surface and with a contact mic. So you can use your chair, you can use basic SM57 on your knee, and that's now a kick. So like that's pretty much how that works. Any impulse coming from any, you know, source that can generate that impulse or capture it, that is what can trigger that sampler. Alright, so MIDI filter modules capable of incoming or taking an incoming frequency signal and converting that to MIDI value. So that means you can hook up some type of thing to a guitar and then just play it like you would a guitar or some other instrument that you're good at, whatever, and you want to be like more, you know, evoke a little more emotion in your lo-fi beats to study to, you know. So you can do that with this. So it's pretty cool. There's a bunch on Sweetwater. They run like $200 to $300, but they're really dope. Like I've played with a bunch of like bands and stuff where they've made that like the kind of 4-point of the music, and so like be like kind of like math rock that sounds like Final Fantasy music kind of thing, but they're also triggering like actual synths with their guitars and stuff. And that shit's dope. I think it's really cool. It's really hard though. Hence the expert rating. Advanced. Beginner shit. Advanced. Alright. You know, that's kind of why I make this a thing, you know. I don't just talk shit to talk shit. It's because people like to downplay stuff because it's hard. It's hard to learn. You know, it's hard to be smart. It's hard to keep learning when things keep on coming up, dude. Like, how am I gonna learn all this shit when new shit keeps on being made? Shit. That should be fun, right? Alright. So, resampling shit. I've done a ton of resampling already. Reese Wednesday. We got Donk Sunday tomorrow. Making some donks. Because it's Sunday. And that's when donks happen. Oh, yeah. So, I also wanted to add this as a possible piece of homework too. Is this stuff to picture here. Because this stuff, I really love doing it. It's not always super fun in the professional world. Because you end up having to do a lot of stuff that you don't really like. Some stuff is cool, you know. But, yeah. I'll actually show you guys my portfolio real quick. And kind of show you what all that means. Like an old portfolio of mine. But yeah, so resampling. You know, and I'm going to like refer to these things a couple times. But yeah, so what I do when I go and print inside of the DAW, that's called internal layback. So I do this always when I print out a track. I never use the export function ever, really. Like I just print inside because I don't trust it. I never trusted it, and I'll never trust it. It can never convince me otherwise, and I'll never Never show your goddamn face. Just because, you know, in like Ableton 7 days and also Ableton 8 and Ableton 9 and Pro Tools 6, 7, 8, 9 and some of 10, they all created intersample errors and dropouts, and would also have errors on automation, errors on the actual oscillators themselves. You'd have oscillator errors. So like that shit, you know, is just I can't bank on that. I also can't produce around that. I can't be like worrying about whether or not something's just gonna print out correctly. I just needed to do it, you know? Just get it done. That's what you're here for, right? Freaking DAW. Just print that shit out. But yeah, so I never use export functions unless I'm just doing it to one waveform, or I'm just doing it to listen to it in like SoundCloud, in which case I hit upload to SoundCloud. Yeah, because I live dangerously. I have the private on. Don't worry. Alright, so reamping and resampling are kind of one and the same. Reamping is resampling. No, people use the export. And people also use triangular dither and rectangular dither. I've seen it. And I'm like, what's you doing with that rectangular dither? They're like, I don't know. I like rectangles. Sorry. So I just crack myself up sometimes. Alright, so reamping, resampling. Alright, so huge process when doing any sound design for any films or anything else that's, you know, not just like small time sound design. You're not just making some donks in Serum and printing them out to have quick donks. You know, this is like you want to go and record a sound that you can go mangle into fucking, you know, a Decepticon or like a kaiju, some kind of crazy fucking, you know, space age monster kind of thing. So a lot of those people, like, if you want to know exactly what most of the Transformer sounds were made with, it was actually a guitar, and with dry ice and metal. So like when you put dry ice on top of metal, a chemical reaction happens, and the metal vibrates rapidly because I think it's like the atoms or whatever, they're just getting super conducted and super excited, freaking out and vibrating rapidly on top of the dry ice, and it makes this fucking doom horn sound. So what a lot of people do for like really big doom horn sounds, like for like, you know, Transformers or whatever, you know, is they get these big metal vats, you know, for like AC ducts, and then they go and suspend them and get a giant block of dry ice, and then just set it down on that dry ice, and then they record that. And that's Foley. You know, and that's how you make a super gnarly fucking sound. Is you go and take a big chunk of dry ice, and you get a big AC duct, and you resonate it with it. Because the AC duct is cavernous. It stays hollow, able to be resonated. So when you suspend it, it's actually not being, I guess, you know, dampened by any other source, which would be somebody holding it up. So it's really just sitting there resonating like this giant fucking doom tuba. Oh yeah, definitely. I think Moody Good actually did most of that for him. But anyways, so every reverb chamber is like that too. If you ever heard of a reverb chamber. So a reverb chamber is when you go and take a big speaker or a little speaker and you put it inside of a space. Yeah, he did. Yeah, sorry. Did I just like oust Skrillex right now? Yeah, he even like admitted it and said, "Hey, blah blah. Thank you, Moody Good, for like helping me." All right, so, all right, so like, Reverb chambers are super sick because, like, say if you wanted to go and like mic up a cardboard box and blast some bass into that cardboard box and make some cardboard reverb, you can do that. You know, or you can find a little like um, metal can, something like that. Put your leads through that. It's your lead. Good. Tell him. I already quit. All right. So, um, yeah. So like, it's really cool how you can kind of do that shit. And this is another like, this is like a college level thing. I don't know if anybody knows about acoustic ensemble. That shit's really really cool. Highly recommend you Google it if you haven't ever. But it's the art of putting a bunch of shit on a table and blasting it with sub and then listening to it all rattle at the same time with a bunch of really rich people. That's a huge part. uh, but yeah, it's like performance art and shit where you go and like take not normal everyday things and make them into amps, make them into instruments, all types of shit. Um, So you can make like at Harvard, they had this one thing where they made like because I used to go to the maker fairs and stuff here in the Bay. So like not Harvard, Stanford. Stanford had these like big old fucking um, like amplifiers that were made of giant steel drums for like oil, and they were like playing guitar out of it, and they were literally just using the tank of oil to transduce sound into the actual piece of metal itself to make the piece of metal itself an amplifier. So that shit's dope. So that's sound design. You want to get into that shit, you can do that too. Soldering's really easy, man. Just gotta heat that shit up. Hook it up. Alright, so Foley. Foley is super sick. And if you don't have a Foley library, definitely get your hands on one. I'll share a Foley library as well after this. I'll probably just make all my classes like an hour and a half. I feel like hour and a half is a good time. But yeah, so like I was already talking about Foley, but that's like sound design, live sound design kind of shit. Foley is diegetic sounds. What that means is stuff that's happening physically, physical movement sounds, motivated sounds. So motivated sounds means a sound is motivated by on-screen movement. So if Optimus Prime is turning into, and that's why I give that example, into a truck, then it's got to sound like him turning from a truck into him. So there's got to be some truck sounds in there. You need to have some heavy ass wheels at some point. And when you see like his innards kind of like rearranging, you need to hear a lot of different pieces moving around. And that all needs to be kind of moving around you. Yeah, and so like that's another thing I want to get into, like, which is just taking a picture and then giving it life. And that's going to be like a harder piece of homework where it's not going to be right now. So I won't even say it right now. So, you know, we'll get to that. But it's really important that you understand how that works. Because, you know, and I actually make this, like, you know, analogy here where syncing to picture is a lot like syncing a resample. Because it is. You know, you really need to understand how you're controlling energy. You need to understand your intention with the sound. You know, the intention of a phrase. So when you listen to somebody like Skrillex, or like Chi, or like whoever, you know, you're not copying their style. You're copying, you know, their influence. You're hearing where they've gone with what they're doing now. Say you're like into dubstep or whatever, and, you know, you get inspired by somebody. You know, if you go and copy their exact line, what you're doing is you're copying their phrase. And so you're in turn stealing their idea. because you're not, you know, the sound itself is not what's in question. Because if the sound itself was in question, then, you know, using a guitar would be kind of like, well, you know, Jimi Hendrix used a guitar, so I don't know if anybody else can use one. So yeah, that doesn't mean shit. Like, you can make any sound, use any sound, whatever. It sounds really boring when I hear cymatics, you know, so that's just something I hate. But that's just me, you know. That's just me being jaded. I'm not really that jaded, but I'm just stating some facts. But yeah, that's just like the essence of what you're sampling or taking, you know, because you're taking a sample of somebody else's work and you're taking their idea, you know, hence why Sam Smith lost his lawsuit against Tom Petty, because Tom Petty sued him for this really basic vocal modulation, and in the eyes of intellectual property law, that's not okay. Because if you're taking a modulation and doing it to pre-copywritten material, you're doing the same exact notes and the way the notes modulate. You know, it's just you can't argue that in court, unfortunately. And so that brings me to my like actual next point here, where I actually left this out. So this goes without saying for all things, and this is kind of more of a music business thing. I don't know if I'm going to teach a music business class, but I'll probably teach some music street smarts, you know. So street smarts 101, you know, how many seconds of a sample can you sample with, you know, and get away with? How many seconds of a sample in the eyes of the law is it okay to sample and get away with without getting proper commission or permission? Like, can anybody in the chat tell me how many seconds? Yep. So it's none. 0 seconds. 0.0 seconds can you sample and use in your own stuff and sell it for money. That is illegal. 100% illegal. All of it. And now it's even become illegal to steal people's ideas because that's intellectual property. So if you can go and prove in the court of law that you have copyrights to a, you know, melody line, you know, and you have proof that it was created at a certain time, you have a copyright for that as well. You can't just say, like, I made this, I recorded a sample once and it did that. It's like, you can't just do that. It has to be like out in the public. So it's like will.i.am stealing somebody's beats on SoundCloud, you know. Oh, well, no one's heard of him. Is it still stealing? Yes, will.i.am. Go home. Alright, so like that's the kind of shit, like if people don't know about that, then they just start doing shit that's just fucking absolutely just draining. And most people will just eat it up because it's fine. You know, it really doesn't matter that much. But, you know, it convolutes the scene. And because of this, you know, there is no growth because people aren't going to be taking risks because they want to get books. They want to get, you know, whatever. They want to fit in. That's just really at the core of it. You know, that really shouldn't be the driving factor of why you make a song a certain way. And that's really what is the biggest thing that, you know, just ruins the scene for most people. It's ruined SoundCloud. And now it's seeping into the bass music scene. And already has in a lot of ways. And like lo-fi and left field. Like lo-fi was gone right when Chill Beats to Study To hit Spotify. That was just terrible. And I know so many people have just been so fucked over in the lo-fi scene now. It's just garbage. People are so garbage. Just not crediting people and just all types of shit. Just really bad. and then making 1,000+ a month on Spotify from it. So that's why it's really important to be conscious with your shit. Know what you're doing, know how to control your stuff, and also have respect for shit. Because if you're not like understanding the history of something, there's no reason for you to respect it. Why the fuck should you give a fuck about an amen break? There's a lot of reasons. First, just being like how old it is and just respecting that, and like really respecting like where shit has come from and why it is as dope it is as it is today. Because it is dope. And I don't think the underground scene is dead at all. I think it's like gonna take over, and I think a lot of people are scared of that. And it's all good. They can be scared, and they can keep on trying to push their ghost produce acts all they want. They can keep on making, fucking cultural appropriated labels like Wakan or some shit like that, and like go sell some shit. Because they're just selling some shit, That's not real music. They're selling an experience. They're selling a festival. They're selling a label. They're not selling real music, unfortunately. As much as Ellis Dream wants to tell me. I don't believe it. But anyways, so like the whole point of my rant here is that you gotta be conscious with your shit. You gotta be conscious with where you're going with it. Sampling is like a huge thing. Sampling is like one of the biggest things that allows a regular producer, meaning a producer who doesn't have any training or anything, allows them to be top dog because they have good taste. And I think that's like my last point. It's like you could know absolutely nothing about either of these things, and you will still succeed if you follow your taste. Because that is really the defining factor that, say somebody like Kill the Noise or Ties from Noisia, or all these people who have paved their own way and taught themselves mostly everything. They didn't have all the knowledge at first, but they were willing to go and take critique, grow from it. People give Ties a lot of like shit for saying what is a Reese like 15 years ago plus, and like that's because they didn't know what a Reese was. I don't think it was a coined term yet back in like 2001. So that's the kind of shit that's just like everybody has to start somewhere. It's like if you want to be Mr. Big Dick I never have to try, then I guess you can do that, but we're gonna like exceed you soon, because talent, isn't everything. Hard work always beats talent. If you have both, then you're gonna mega win. It's just a matter of time. It literally is just a matter of time. It's not like, oh man, if I just do this, it's like, no, when it's my turn, because that's literally what it is. It's just when it's your turn. It's not when you pivot to sound like what they're selling right now, because that's really like the biggest problem. It's like you don't want to pivot to what they're selling, and also this is why I'm doing this school, because you shouldn't have to pivot because you spent so much money on a goddamn school. And that's 100% it. You want to go live in LA? Go move to LA. You're that person that wants to live in LA and thinks that they will make it only if they live there. I'm from California. This is just my thing. This is where I live. I was born and raised in East LA. So that's just where my family is. So like that's not required. Like people always say like, oh, my scene sucks, dude. I wish I was in California. You just have like everything. It's like, you're right, we do have a lot. And super grateful. But it really isn't everything. And the biggest thing you'll find when you get here and you don't have a big community of friends or whatever, it's really easy to get lost in the sauce. There's a lot of noise, happening all the time. And this is the reason why people do shit and pivot their sounds to be copycats. Because being a copycat is not, is not paying homage to your hero, Like, if you love Vincent Van Gogh, you wouldn't go and just draw Starry Night and be like, oh, it's because I love him. But you sold it on eBay and you said it was him. But I love him. It's flattering. Here's my ear. Don't get me wrong, dude. I love LA, and more than half of my friends are there. But my big point is it doesn't take LA to break it at all, and that should be pretty evident on who's killing it in the scene right now. Because every time the scene changes and it's like, oh, now it's time to be in Philadelphia, I guess. We gonna move Philly. I'm gonna become friends with Subtronics, and Space Jesus. Espacio Jesus de Espacio. And it's just really not. It's really not about being in a scene. It's really not about that. It's just about making music, doing what you like, and really just attaining it. Because there's a lot of fucking knowledge out here, but everybody wants to just go and tell you how to make this producer's sound, and that's a vast majority of people's stuff, and the information that's public, because nobody wants to go and take this and give it away for free. And I don't give a fuck. Fuck their institution. I'll give it away for free. Try to tell me that this knowledge is yours. I'll see you in court. Alright, so just to sum up here. So next week in sampling, I'm going to do some resampling. We're going to get into I'm going to bring a video in, and then I'm going to cut to video, and then I'm going to go and start talking about some more in-depth stuff with samplers and how drum racks work, and just talking about some basic sampling theory, going through different YouTube clips, whatever, just fucking crate diving, because that's a huge part, being able to recognize what's the sauce. Got to know what the good shit is, because that's 100% why Dilla and Madlib are so prolific, because they just follow whatever the fuck they want to do. You can just hear it. See Dilla with his drum production. It's it really is. YouTube is the best. I'll just YouTube to MP3 or whatever. Sometimes I'll sample shit from other mediums like vinyl or whatever if I have the means to do it. Which I got a ton of warped classical records that'll actually be super good to sample. But yeah. So also, actually didn't talk about this, but it's one little piece here. If you're thinking about getting into sound for film at all, and this is something if you're taking my free class here and you're really interested in that, I do recommend checking out some kind of community college or something and trying to go down that road, because it's actually pretty cool. It's way better if you got a degree though, a real degree, not a degree from a music school. Go to a real college and get a degree. Okay, so ADR, ambience, and Wilhelm scream. That shit's hilarious, because this is why you need to be good in sampling as a sound designer, because sometimes the on-screen motivated sounds and shit, they'll have somebody making a noise, literally an extra or something dying, and they're like, hey, can you put a sound there? Yeah, I'll put the Wilhelm scream there. And so if you look that up, this scream has been used in over 100 movies, and there's compilations on compilations, just probably thousands. It was used so many times in Star Wars. It's ridiculous. But yeah, they're not good at what they do, I guess. And they don't have a library, so they just keep on using this fucking scream over and over. And it's hilarious. But yeah, so anyways, guys, do your homework. So, what was homework? Watch, sample this, make some beats, submit to a quiz next week. I'll quiz on this stuff. Look at this, read your notes, but don't use your notes on the quiz. And if you use your notes on the quiz, I'll know. I'll just know. Alright, so build at least 3 patches in a sampler of your choice with audio you record. So, this should be easy to do. You know, I shouldn't have to spell that out for you. If you need me to spell it out for you, hit me up. Because, you know, not that hard. Just load up a sampler, drop a thing in there. You can record some audio. All good. So, here's the hard thing though. Make a multi-sampler. I haven't talked about this at all. So, if you can do this, I'll be impressed. And you should show me. Alright, so read these things if you can get your hands on them in any way possible. Sampling handbook is really cool. This one teaches you how to make scripted contact players. And it's great. Because that's really, really hard to do. It's not an easy thing. So if you're trying to get into like making some really dope contact players, definitely get this book. Also Bobcats again. So everything I just said about this, you'll be able to learn in that book as well. Also Synth Secrets, get that shit on sampling. And hip hop culture. This book is actually really good. It's pretty cheap too. Just if you're trying to learn about like beats and how to make some beats, make some fancy beats. Yeah, it's a really good thing. It's like first beats I ever made were definitely hip hop, and then right after that I went to garage and house. And I didn't really know why for a while, but then once I understood what two-step and rhythm kind of meant, I understood because garage and hip hop are really, really similar in terms of like, just overall swing. If you write a garage tune, 138 or whatever, or 134, and then slow it down to 90, it'd be a pretty dope hip hop beat. Anyways, so yeah, that's it for today. Come through tomorrow for some donks, and I'm just gonna make a beat, and I might even I'll open up I Know You See It tomorrow, and if anybody wants me to kind of do a little track breakdown, let me know, because I was thinking about doing that, so I can definitely do a little track breakdown tomorrow. So definitely stay hydrated, y'all, and pay for your sample packs. All right.